All right, well, in Bible study, we're going to keep on this discussion that we've been having about marriage and union. So we are on Jacob's marriage. Jacob's marriage. We covered Isaac's marriage last. We sort of jumped through Abraham. I plan on covering Abraham. If we have time, we'll cover him today. I've got something wonky going on. Let me see if I can move that. It's better, I guess. So if we cover Abraham, Isaac, today will be Jacob. Those are the patriarchs. And then we'll look at some other issues and start to apply the laws to what we've already looked at and the stuff we've seen. So the reason why we went through this is we're looking at what's called case law. And case law is whenever you have situations in the Bible, but it's not law. It's not like thou shalt not. It's just kind of explaining it. But when you see the same laws over and over and over again being repeated, for instance, time and again we keep running into the fact that both Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did not want any of their children to marry outside of their kindred and their people. And while we can substantiate that with lots of biblical law, it's a case law that shows us it was being followed time and again. And so there's laws in the Bible that then express that directly. It say thou shalt not. But these are cases, they're examples. So as we look at case laws, we kind of have a bunch of scripture to deal with from Genesis that we have to go through in order to understand some of what's going on here. So if we go to Genesis 29, we'll get some readers. And we'll split that chapter up. And really, chapter 30 is involved as well, but I think we'll get the gist of everything out of 29, and I'll do the skip through on 20 out of 30. So let's see, what do we got? We've got 35 verses, so it's basically like 12 and a half. So we need somebody to do 12 and someone to do 13. So maybe Kenny can start out with 13 and Levi can finish with the last 12.
Talking about chapter 29?
Yes.
1. 1.
On what?
Genesis chapter 29.
Genesis 29.
Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. And thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place. And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And behold, Rachel, his daughter, cometh with the sheep. And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. And they said, We cannot, until all the flocks be gathered together. Until they roll the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep. While he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near, and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted up his voice, and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. And it came to pass, when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things.
That's
14.
And
said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore solve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. And Laban said, It is better that I give her to thee, than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her. And Jacob said unto Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him. And he went in unto her, and Laban gave unto his daughter Zilpah his maid for an handmaid. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, What is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? And Laban said, It must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week. And he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with them yet 7 other years.
Verse 30, When Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister, and said unto Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead, who has withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah her handmaid to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. And Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God has judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. And so I just wanted to add that in because that's the last wife of Jacob that's being mentioned, so we can kind of get a full context of what's talked about there. So we'll go back a little bit. If you'll notice, the discussion here going on, originally when you first see these people meeting each other, the very first thing they start doing is figuring out how they're related, right? So they start talking about their relationship to one another, how they're relatives or kindred. And this is a much closer marriage than we're very used to and comfortable with in our day and age. It is a marriage of cousins, and cousins who prior to being cousins are already cousins. So it's a pretty close family tie here, but you can see that Jacob is going to do that, and the recognition in verse 14 harkens back to what we covered all the way in Genesis chapter 2. Look at verse 14. It says, And Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him a space of a month, and that literally means for a new moon period. In the Hebrew, the word's kodesh there for month. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed. Some people say that that translation could be cross-eyed. In other words, she wasn't quite as good looking. But Rachel was beautiful and well favored. So there's literally there's an opinion among scholars that tender-eyed either means she had bad eyesight, or that she actually had something that made her like a lazy eye or something about her that wasn't, because the contrast is that Leah's like this, but Rachel's like that. And he doesn't choose the older, he chooses the younger, who's more beautiful and well favored. And so then Jacob loves Rachel and says, I'll serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. And so we can see the concept of dowry starting. What are you going to do to get my daughter? What are you going to give me? And immediately you're once again right back into looking at all these requirements for marriage that actually have to come before you take a woman to be your wife, biblically speaking. You also see the covenant nature of marriage. Laban and Jacob immediately start using biblical language, and once again, there's that flesh and bone language that comes right out of Genesis. When God made Eve, he says, this is bone of your bone and flesh of your flesh. So there's that language again. Laban and Jacob are now discussing how they are kindred to one another, and that you have a right to have an interest in my daughter. And that's kind of important to think about, because in our day and age, we don't realize that it is, when Jesus says, he that looks upon a woman to lust after has committed adultery in his heart already, we tend to think of that in a two-dimensional sense. You look at a square, that's two-dimensional. You look at a cube, and it's three-dimensional. You look at it from all the different angles, you start gaining dimension, right? So I'm bringing this up because when Jesus says that, any form of adultery is adultery in the heart if you're considering it. So it doesn't matter which way you're going to break the seventh commandment, which is thou shalt not commit adultery. You're going to end up coveting it in your heart. So if a man who is not allowed to marry a Canaanite like Esau looks at a woman and to lust upon her, though he's not allowed to have her, that's adultery in his heart. And then when he takes her, it's adultery. So Laban recognizes that you have a right to look at my daughter, to consider her, And that's the thing. It's like any man considering marriage is going to acknowledge the beauty of a woman. And you can see that all through the text. He looks upon this one, she doesn't look as good. He looks at this one, she's beautiful to him. It doesn't mean, obviously, that you're engaging in beyond thoughts that you're not supposed to be engaged in, thinking about things you shouldn't think about. But what it does definitely acknowledge is that men and women are going to think about each other in terms of marriage. Like, do I think you're beautiful? Do I think that you're handsome? That's going to happen before marriage. You don't can't think about that until we're married, or else you'd never be attracted to the person. It'd be kind of dumb. So one of the first things that you notice in Scripture, and you got to go back to the next chapter if you want to go back to, actually go back to 27, and we'll cover this in a minute. We'll cover this for a second too. The very first thing is going to be something that happens through the sight of your eyes. You see a woman and or a man, and they look like you. They're flesh of your flesh and they're bone of your bone. They're white if you're white. They're black if you're black, which we don't have any black people here. But if you're Asian, they're Asian. They're flesh of your flesh, they're bone of your own. Their flesh looks like you, their bones look like you, and that is what we call physiognomy traits. Physiognomy is an old ethnology term for how we looked at the races of people in the world. People's bone structures are different when they're of a different race. Yeah, but the Bible says skin's important. It says flesh of your flesh, bone of your bone. So when you look at a black guy and you're a white woman, if you start entertaining, relationships, you have ventured into adultery, just like Jesus says. You don't look upon them to lust after them, and vice versa. If it's a black woman and you're a white man, or an Asian or a Native American or whatever it is. And same for them. They shouldn't be looking at white people because, I'm partial and I think white women are much more beautiful than all other peoples in the world. But nevertheless, they should think that about their people as far as I'm concerned. I think that's a natural thing. Bluebirds like bluebirds and redbirds like redbirds, like the great scholar Muhammad Ali once said. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty good interview if you have never seen it. All you got to do is look up on YouTube Muhammad Ali and bluebirds and redbirds, and it'll come right up. Probably the most basic way of looking at the subject of race that you can get to. So before we go any further and we look at this whole concept of covenant marriage, there's these certain, like I told you last week, nexuses that are, or doorways that are crossed. And you cross into a new doorway as you approach into the contemplations of marriage. Well, the very first thing you do is, I see a woman who looks like me. I could marry her. But then you inquire as to who she is and where she's from and if she's actually capable marriageable stock. Is she married? You know, that crosses her off the list. Is she related to you? Well, then it crosses her off the list if she's too closely related. You know, there's all these things, but as you acknowledge it, you see that there are ways in which that you progress in the marriage, right? And so the very first thing, every time, going back to Genesis chapter 27, and we'll read a portion of 28, we start to see that this was a very important thing, not just for the man looking for a wife, but also for the parents to be engaged in the marriage. Now, this is something that we don't care about anymore. Parents don't care about their children's marriages. They don't help them choose mates in most of today's culture, but it's something Christian parents are actually encouraged to be engaged in if they care about God's law. And you can see this happens. It's not just with the girls. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, let the boys pick out a wife for themselves. Don't worry about who they pick. Just make sure your daughters get a good marriage." And that's not true, because every time we see fathers being engaged in finding mates, helping them find a helpmate, just like we saw God engaged in getting Adam a helpmate when he found Eve, which he didn't find, he created. So those are kind of important things to look at also. So if you go to Genesis 27, and last week you remember we talked about Esau's poor marriages. Esau in Hebrews chapter 11 was called a fornicator. He's called a fornicator because he married Hittite or Canaanite women. And he wasn't allowed. They had done all the things that, was talked about in Leviticus chapter 18 and 20, which we covered. And they had fluted themselves. They were not marriageable stock. God says they're not good for marriage. You can't marry them no matter how whitish they looked. They weren't good for marriage. So even if they had a beautiful look to them still, or whatever, an exotic look, whatever it was, they were off limits. But Esau didn't get the memo for some reason. I can't explain why. But it is called in Hebrews 11 fornication. Straight out, it's a form of adultery. And so there's no ifs, ands, or buts there. But if you look at Genesis 27, you'll see the discussion of the parents as they're helping Jacob select better mates than Esau had. And look at verse 43. "Now therefore, my son, obey my voice and arise, flee to Laban, my brother in Haran." So you can see they're actually telling him where to go. Haran is the old ancestral home of the Hebrews. "Tarry with him a few days until thy brother's fury turn away, until thy brother's anger turn away from thee, and he forget that which thou hast done to him. Then I will send and I will fetch thee from thence. Why should I be deprived also of you both in one day?" And Rebekah said unto Isaac, "I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth." Now that's another term for the Hittites. They're a Canaanite tribe. The daughters of Heth. "If Jacob take a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these, which are of the daughters of the land, what good should my life do me?" So literally, in Genesis 27:46, Rebekah is telling Isaac, her husband, who they just had this whole blessing thing go on, where, the blessing's given to Jacob instead of Esau, and Esau's upset now, and he's going to kill, he says he wants to kill his brother, and Jacob's trying to figure out what to do, and mom's going to help. And she's telling Isaac, "Listen, we need to support him to go because he can't marry these women that Esau married anyway." And so you see that Rebekah's literally saying, my life's worthless if he does what Esau did. Like, no one will pass on our seed. So there is literally a death of the seed of a person when they race mix that's being referred to here. So it's as if her life would become extinguished. Her purpose would no longer be good. So she said, he's got to marry one of our people, Isaac. You got to send him away to marry. So then look at what is said in verse 28. Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. So it's very clear. That's the whole purpose. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father. So they're going right back to where Isaac went. Take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. I mean, he's given this really narrow window of people to choose from. He's telling them directly, go here and marry this. And God Almighty bless thee and make thee fruitful and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people. So you see, he's giving him the blessings of Abraham, verse 4, and give thee the blessings of Abraham. So this is really important to notice. It's kind of a side notice because this isn't what our study's about. But Jacob may have deceived Isaac on one hand, but these blessings are not given to him through deception. Isaac knows what he's done by this point. He knew that he deceived him, got the blessing of Esau. He knows what he's done, and he's blessing him beyond, and he's giving him the ultimate blessing of Messiah. So when he says the blessing of Abraham, it's to become the nation of Israel. It's to carry the seed of the Messiah. So it's like the greatest blessing that could be given. He gives it knowledgeably. He's not deceived anymore. So he says, give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which God gave unto Abraham. And Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went to Padan Aram unto Laban, son of Bethuel the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. When Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob, he sent him away to Padan Aram to take him a wife from thence, and that he blessed him and gave him a charge, saying, You shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Like, this has always blown me away. Here's Esau, like, just now figuring it out. Oh, Mom and Dad don't like the Canaanite girls, huh? Oh, what am I going to do about that? But it says in verse 7, it says that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother and went to Padan Aram. So you have a fifth commandment connection in verse 7. That the obedience or the honoring of father and mother is being recognized by Jacob, that he actually went to his parents for permission of a marriageable stock. Who should I marry? And listened to them and did what he commanded. So there's a blessing in that. Sometimes it may not seem like a blessing, but there is a blessing, especially when you're young and you're probably not thinking straight, like Esau apparently wasn't at one time. And Esau, seeing the daughters of Canaan, didn't please his father. Like, what an epiphany moment. It just makes you wonder how he took his wives. Like, was there no wedding ceremony? It's like you come home and say, hey, Dad, I married another Hittite girl. I mean, he had like 8 of them. And what did Dad say? Like, oh, okay. It really is strange that he lived far away, like far enough away that they didn't talk much. It's just odd. I've always thought that was strange, how Esau just kind of accumulates Canaanite women and Dad's and Mom hate it.
Or maybe he knew that they didn't like it, but it didn't bother him as much until they realized that, oh, Jacob's the goody little two-shoes listening to Mom and Dad.
Right. Yeah. So then look at this. This is another interesting thing, and this is kind of like a two-edged sword kind of thing. Then went Esau to Ishmael, and now you remember Ishmael is the son of Hagar and Abraham. It's the son that was sent away. It was the divorced woman, which we'll cover that too here eventually. And he goes and he took unto the wives which he had, so he already got these Canaanite girls, and then he takes another wife, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, sister of Nabajoth, to be his wife. So he's like, oh, okay, so the Canaanites don't make Dad happy. I'll go and get one of Ishmael's girls. And he does, and so he kind of creates the only clean line of Esau, the only line of Esau that's not Canaanite. And interestingly enough, if you do your biblical genealogy studies, that group of Edomites literally keep separate from the rest of the people in the genealogies. And most of the time you'll see that they are the leaders of the people. And Amalek is kind of like the other side of the family, who's the wicked one. Midianites descend from Medan, which is a son of Keturah.
So they would be considered the Edomites?
Midianites?
No, the ones, the pure line.
They're still called Edomites. They're the sons of Esau.
Or they allowed to be married?
Yes.
Well, yeah, that's where in Deuteronomy it says not to abhor an Edomite.
Exactly.
Brother would be that line.
That was actually where I was going to go next. So Deuteronomy 23. Yeah. That was good. It means we're all thinking the same.
Joe?
Well, we can talk about that for a minute, but that's kind of like one of them things where it's like, depends on how you read the text, and you got to only read it from the Septuagint. But yeah. So in Deuteronomy chapter 23, we have some laws of God that deal with who you can and cannot marry, and we've covered enough of this now that I think we can talk about it and understand what it's dealing with, because we already talked about incest, right? We've talked about race mixing, and we've talked about now the Edomites. So we have enough information to understand what this law is saying, but God puts it in law form. And beyond law form, it's actually not just law, it's church law. So this is literally like when it says the congregation of the Lord in the Septuagint, it literally is the church, ecclesia. It's the same word used in the New Testament, the church of the Lord, or the church of Yahweh. And so it's literally talking about, I believe, church leadership. Now, some people say, oh, no, it's talking about the whole congregation. I think as an example it is, but when you look at any church leadership laws, right, and you look at, like, for instance, in Timothy and Titus and Peter and all the places where law is given in the New Testament for, like, who a deacon can be, who an elder can be, who a pastor can be, and all that kind of stuff, those examples don't apply to everybody because not everyone's going to fit the bill, but that is what everybody should be striving for. Like, you're not looking at that going, oh, that's just for the pastor to not be a slanderer. We can slander if we want to. You know, it's obvious everybody shouldn't be a slanderer. So whoever the leaders are of society have to rule justly in the fear of God, because people are going to say, oh, we want to be like the people. We want to be like the leader. The people want to be like the leader. That's how it's going to be. If our government's corrupt, people are corrupt. That's just the way it's going to be. So these laws here are telling you, here's what church leadership is to look like, and church leadership is a little different than just regular leadership. It does apply to kings, and it would apply to what we call the federal government. That's the government like David. David rules over all the tribes. That's federal. But in churches, we have captains of tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands, and that's technically the church. It's tribal. So the tribal government is the church government, and then the federal government is like the one guy who rules as a king. In this case here, this is going to talk about basically the pastor of 10, the pastor of 50, the pastor of hundreds and thousands when you have that structure. So here's what it says. He that is wounded in the stones, literally saying a guy who's castrated, literally saying a guy who's had his testicles cut off or crushed, which they used to do back in old days in order to make a man a eunuch, or for whatever reason, or who has his private member cut off, I think you can figure that out without explanation, shall not enter into the congregation of Yahweh. So literally a man who has emasculated himself is not allowed to be a leader in church. Because if you read this right out of the Septuagint text, it says, he shall not enter into the church of the Lord. So we know that eunuchs could worship with the common people. It's not about who comes in for worship in the church. It's not talking about who lives in the land in general. Obviously, the Ethiopian eunuch would not have been baptized if, sorry, you can't be saved. And that didn't happen, right? So we know there were eunuchs all throughout the Bible who were saved. There's a specific chapter in the book of Isaiah devoted to how a faithful eunuch can be a godly man. And so that's not what it's talking about, but it is talking about leadership. And these laws that we could pull out of all the stuff we've read are dealing with, this is marriage issues. Why would a man who's emasculated not be able to lead other men in the church? Because, well, he doesn't have children. He can't teach to be fruitful and multiply. He can't show whether his family's a good family. He can't do all kinds of stuff. He doesn't have a family. He doesn't appreciate who he is in God's sight. And so there's something there to be stated. So that's the first line. Not really what we're talking about today, but it's good to mention. Verse 2, a bastard, which is the Hebrew word mamzer. And interestingly, in the Septuagint, it literally could read a son of fornication. And so some translations of Septuagint say one born of a whore, I think is how some translations say it. If I remember right, the Jerusalem Bible is the only English translation of the Bible that says one of a mixed race directly. They translated it straight like that, which is literally what the word mamzer means in Hebrew. So in English, we used to say bastard, which could mean somebody of an unknown origin. You don't know who their dad is. But more directly, a bastard is someone who's base. So if you think about root words, the word bastard is base-tard, literally. You know, we all know what the word retard means. But most of us don't know what a bastard is because we don't talk like that. But a bastard literally means your base, your foundation, your origins is corrupted. And so mamzer in Hebrew is two compound words in Hebrew. Mam, which means spotted or blemished. It's the same word in the Bible where it says if you have a Passover lamb or a sacrifice and it has a blemish, it doesn't count. It's the word mem. So mem and then zor means strange in Hebrew. So it's literally a compound word that means blemished or marked strange. Someone's thirsty. And they're continuously considered for 10 generations then not able to be part of the congregation of the church of the Lord. So a bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even his 10th generation shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. So when we look at Esau's line of people, now that we have some interesting information, we see that Esau's people are not allowed to lead the church of God. So that is a specific group that's being targeted and being looked at because they married with the Canaanites. And if you married with another group of people that were not of your flesh and not of your bone, you would then not be able to be part of the congregation of the Lord or in the leadership of the church for 10 generations. Now, I take that literally. I don't think it's figurative. In other words, I don't think it means forever. Some people do. I believe that under the 10th generation only applies whenever a person is... this is only going to happen in times where people don't know God's law. Something gets blended into the family. But once it's 10 generations in there, you wouldn't know that it was there most likely anyhow. And so it's dealing with that specific situation. I know some people would disagree. And just for the record, I know my genealogy pretty far back, and I'm not saying this because in the 11th generation I have a nigger in the woodpile or something. So just to put it out there, that's not why I'm taking that opinion. If this gets put on YouTube, that will get taken off. So better edit something. Deuteronomy 23, verse 3. An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of Yahweh. So we covered that. That is Lot's children by incest. Remember, the Ammonites came from Lot and his daughter. The Moabites came from Lot and his other daughter. They don't enter into the congregation of Yahweh, the church of Yahweh, even to their 10th generation. They shall not enter into the congregation of Yahweh forever. There is a much more strict law that's placed upon this one. It says 10 generations forever. And so it is a little stricter on that for whatever reason. And for all intents and purposes, the Moabites and the Ammonites are pure stock. They're just inbreds. So it's not about just race. It's also about the keeping of God's law in this case. And it's not just that. It gives you the reason because they did not treat Israel well in the wilderness and hired Balaam to curse them. There's one more law in verse 7. We're going to skip over the other stuff. You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, because you were a stranger in his land. The children that are begotten of them shall enter into the congregation of the church of Yahweh in their 3rd generation. So this is letting us know that there must be a line of Edomites that are actually of pure enough stock that in 3 generations they're able to be part of the church. And as far as the Egyptians, though the Egyptians had some weird stuff going on, they are not as separated from the church as the Canaanite is. Now, all of these things, other than obviously verse 1, is dealing with female descent. So nobody would be able to lead the church in Israel and be a tribal leader, a pastor in the church, if they were not on their male descent descended from one of the 12 tribes. That's just basic inheritance laws. So this is only going to deal with if someone married a woman who had something in her genealogy on the female side that this is dealing with. It's not dealing with a man. In other words, a male Egyptian or a male Edomite or a male, whatever, is not going to ever be a leader in the church in general because he should be a leader in his own church. And so males do not get counted according to Israel. They're kept out as strangers all the time. They're always going to be a stranger, even if they look the same, and it's not really about what race they are. It's about the fact that they're not part of the same nation. So Only reason I'm going through this right now is to show some law dealing with Genesis 27, Genesis 28, and why Jacob had to go to his own people and get himself a woman from his own flesh and bone. Now we're going to go and actually deal with Jacob's 4 marriages. So, is there any questions before we get into that?
I don't have a question, but one thing I always wondered, what happened with Jacob to where he didn't know until the next morning that it was Leah and not Rachel? Was he drunk? Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was.
Like, that's what I was thinking, that's what I always just assumed.
Yeah.
It's like he wakes up in the morning like, what is this?
Yeah.
I was like, how do you not know?
I don't know. That's one of them. We don't get a whole lot of details, but I don't think much has changed in the world. I think honeymoons have always been honeymoons.
So you probably had a little too much wine.
And I'm thinking Laban probably is encouraging some extra drinking because he had a little switcheroo he wanted to do. And he probably just kept pouring it on. He was like, give Jacob the strong stuff. Drink this, boy. I'm sure it wasn't no different than any other hillbilly wedding. He was probably like, come on, drink, drink, drink. And eventually, he just doesn't know what he's doing, apparently. I don't know. But the difference is Noah does the same thing and really messes everything up. Jacob gets it, and he just ends up stuck with a wife. So at least
Which is still a legal wife.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we definitely don't have enough information to speculate too much more than to know that they had some kind of marriage ceremony, some kind of party.
Right.
And the next day wakes up with her. Yeah. That is weird. It's strange. Well, let's talk about something that's unpopular, and I don't like to dwell on this, and I'll be honest with you. People who are really big on polygamy are weird. I'm just going to put it out flat. I've been alive in both, in the 20th and 21st century. Now, people are weird to talk about. Everybody I've ever met who have been super hardcore on the subject of polygamy, they're just weirdos. They obsess over it. It's like, yeah, guy can have more than one wife. And then they're like, all right, dude, that's just something in the Bible. Let's keep on rolling. And they get hung up on it. So it does show a little heart problem there, I think, with a lot of people. But in a culture where it's normal, you have to deal with it. And so this is a culture that's normal. Obviously, the father's like, I'm going to give you 2 wives. And in the process, he ends up getting 4. And we'll discuss a little bit of how that worked just because it's in the text and you have to deal with it. A lot of people would not cover this. We just skip over and be like, it was a sin. It really shouldn't be that way. Let's just move on. But you got to deal with it.
Or people say that God just dealt with it for a time.
But they do that.
Changed his mind.
You can do that with everything then.
Right.
And that's part of dispensationalism, really. It's part of that mindset of where God's law is just kind of transient. The first time we really run into this situation is with Hagar. So it happened in the life of Abraham already. And so once again, like I said, we're going to deal with Hagar separately because we're going to deal with that during this time of dealing with divorce. But we'll talk about it. But this situation is the same. The Hebrew word is sephah, that is used for handmaid, the word handmaid or maidservant, bondmaid, handmaid. It's translated different ways. And there's 2 of them mentioned that become Jacob's wives. Now, the interesting thing is the word is wife. Some people would love to keep the status separate and say, well, they're lesser wives. There's nothing in the text that indicates that. Nothing. Not one thing. The only thing you can find in the text is that the wife that gives the handmaid, because there's some kind of attachment that when she is married to Jacob, Leah brings with her Zilpah. And that's one handmaid. And she's somehow intimately attached to Leah, like she's her helper. A lot of times, if you read things, these handmaids literally could have been the nurses to them. Like they took care of them as children. So they're older than them by a few years or a decade or whatever. So they're literally older women that have been there since they were born, or older girls. And the other interesting thing is that there's relative words to this that would indicate that most of the time in a normal society, a sephah, which is the word used here in Hebrew, is literally a relative, like a cousin or somebody. So Zilpah and Bilhah are actually relatives to Leah and Rachel. And how this would happen is through people getting into debt, being poor, needing help, and then they would literally sell their children into bondage. And girls could, be sold to another family to be taken care of when someone didn't have the money to provide for them, and they would become handmaids to the family, and they would be treated like a daughter. And so these are things that we just don't even think about anymore. These are situations. Only the government's allowed to do all this anymore. They can sell your kids to whoever they want. But regular people do not think this is normal talk. And so Leah brings with her her own sepha, or her own handmaiden. And there's a related word which would be masepha, and it literally means from one's kin. And I got the Strong's numbers if anybody wants to look it up and do their own study on this. It literally relates back to one's family. And so the most likely what is going on in these situations is that there is a family member, a cousin, second cousin, some kind of family member from father or mother's side of the family who is being passed on as the nurse or as the handmaiden to the other child. So when Leah is married to Jacob, she came with Zilpah. When Rachel is married, she comes with Bilhah. Jacob ends up with 4 wives out of the mix, and he ends up with 12 children plus Dinah, who is his daughter. And so these all are situations that kind of need to be dealt with, but in every situation, this handmaid or this sepha, which is just an easier way to refer to it because it kind of combines all that stuff, literally still has to become a wife, but not entirely. In other words, because she came with the wife, she doesn't have the consent of headship is only found in the woman, which is very peculiar. So, for instance, when you see Leah, and we look at the consent of headship, so there's 3 things we're looking at: consent of headship, dowry, and sexual union. Those are the 3 things in all marriages, right? But when it comes to these women that are handmaids, they don't have all 3 things. There's no dowry. One thing is removed. And I can't explain to you 100% why that is, other than the fact that they kind of were already paid for through coming with the wife. So it was like part of the deal. But there's nothing you can really tie that to in Scripture that I can find, at least. Maybe someone's done a more in-depth study of it. But in Genesis 29:18, it says, Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And so you see, there's the consent of headship. Laban agrees, right? He says, you can marry my daughter in verse 19. And then the dowry is determined. I will serve thee for 7 years. Now, the weird thing is that this applies to both Rachel and Leah. So he actually, you remember we covered last week a contract, covenant being made with people. So a guy says to another guy, and this happened in Isaac's marriage whenever he deals with the same man. You remember he went and he had to deal with Laban before because Bethuel was dead. So the father was dead, the brother's taking care of the business, and he's making a deal, and he says, we will send her with you, and she will go and become Abraham's son's wife. So there's an agreement, like this is the purpose for this marriage. We will do this, but this is what she has to do because Isaac wasn't there. He was at home taking care of the flocks or whatever. And so that contractual agreement, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, like all of these contractual agreements, this is my helpmate, are then being established here for the purpose of the marriage. And it is, I will give her to you. And it specifically says Rachel. And so Laban just is a straight up liar. There's no other words for it. He's a conniving liar. He's a covenant breaker. He's a horrible guy. Yet he is a full-blown kinsman. So you can't go and play the card and be like, yeah, he's probably a Jew. He's not. He's a shyster of a guy is what he is. And you got to watch out. There's a lot of white shysters out there. Laban said, it's better I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. Verse 19, and it came to pass that in the evening that he took Leah his daughter, and he brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for an handmaid. And so there's this weird situation that Kenny was talking about where in verse 23, Genesis 29:23, actually, let's go up one. Jacob said, Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled. So he does his 7 years. It's a long time. That I may go in unto her. So he's wanting to, be a husband now, and he wants to marry his wife. Laban says, well, we got to have a feast first. So you see in this situation, this is not a requirement, but most of the time in the Bible you find wedding feasts. Like having wedding banquets is a normal thing. A lot of people in this thing that I was talking about at the very beginning of this message, they'll say things like, sex is marriage, it's all you need to do. Take her into the tent, things are over, it's all done. But the truth is under normal circumstances, you check off all the lists. Is she one of your own people? Yes. Do you get consent from headship? Yes. Do you pay the dowry? Yes. Do you then have a ceremony? Yes. Do you have covenants that are involved? Yeah. You make promises. This is what we're going to get married. This is what I want out of your daughter. This is what I'm going to do. And then, is there normally a feast or a wedding feast? Yes. You remember Jesus' first miracle was at a wedding feast.
If it was just the sex was all marriage was, then that would mean rape wouldn't be a crime. It would just be a marriage, which would be pretty messed up.
Yeah, well, we'll cover that too. In some cases it is marriage, in other cases it's not. Sometimes it's death penalty. So, there are odd situations where, especially when you're dealing with young people, being enticed and stuff, you do have situations where it's not as cut and dry.
Well, idea deals away with the father's blessing.
Absolutely, it does. Well, the father has to retroactively still give permission according to Scripture.
Right.
Yeah. No matter how it happens, the father of the bride still has the right to say yes or no, and maybe to kill you.
Right.
So, which I would kill the guy. Just saying, I just take my fatherly prerogatives on the situation and deal with God face to face on it. Say, well, why I did what I did. Sit down. Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass at evening, so we've got an all day long, probably festival going on, that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for a handmaid. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? So you see that he's calling fraud. And Laban said, it must not so be done in our country. So look, he's doing this thing where he's like, listen, you know the rules around here. You should have known better. We don't marry the younger before the older. You knew what you were getting into. Come on. And meanwhile, most likely what happened is they drank all day, which is pretty common on in weddings. Still to this day, people pretty much make the marriage festival more about drinking than anything else, under not all circumstances. Most, if you're of any good quality, you're not going to do that. But these must have been hillbilly Harronites or something. I don't know what to tell you. They're hitting the stills. And got the moonshine going, because he was so drunk at evening time he didn't know who he was with, and he woke up in the morning and couldn't take it back. So he went the full way with her. He married her, and he's stuck with her now. He says, I got beguiled, but Laban says, listen, this isn't trickery. You know what the rules are around here. You just didn't pay attention to the law. He says, now you got to serve me for the other one too. So 14 years, and he gets the next one. Now, the only thing you can say is that it's a 2-for-1 deal. He got Zilpah, and he ended up getting Leah, which is kind of, it was like a get tricked and get one free. I don't know. So then he fulfills her week, 7 years, verse 27, and he gets the other one. Jacob did so. He fulfilled her week, verse 28, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, be her maid. And so then we see all of these situations meet the requirements. You have the headship consents. Jacob agrees. Now, I will say the covenant's technically not there for Leah. He did never make a real agreement for Leah. So he got tricked. He got shiested on that. But with Rachel, he ends up getting exactly what he wants. He pays another 7 years, so he's 14 years older by the time he gets to her. And she's not having as easy time bearing children under both circumstances. So for whatever reason, there's this contention that starts, probably because Leah's a little ugly, and she's not as pretty as Rachel, and so she's wanting to like really prove herself. And if you read these stories, you'd find over and over again that Leah's like really wanting to be this good wife. And I kind of always felt bad for Leah when I read it, to be honest with you. You feel bad for her. It's like, guy never wanted you in the first place. Now he's stuck with you. Your dad tricked you. Your dad's a shyster. And she kind of gets the raw end of it, and God blesses her because of it. You know, God sees the affliction of Leah and does say, okay, and she has the most children. And that's where the real blessing is. Now, nowadays, we don't think of that. Men want a beautiful wife. That's the blessing, is I got a pretty girl. Whereas in these situations, with Leah, the fruitfulness of the womb is actually the blessing. And so you can see the women, they're really wanting children. They're not just wanting a free ride and a good husband. And that ends up leading to how the handmaids end up getting given to Jacob also. So let's look at this for a minute. It says, when Leah, chapter 30, verse 9, when Leah saw that she had left bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and she gave her Jacob to wife. And so, like I said, the word is wife. She's literally a real wife. And so I've heard so many people be like, it's not really a real wife. It was a lesser wife. It was something else. It's like, no, she was a legitimate wife according to Scripture. She had legitimate children. All the 12 tribes received a legitimate inheritance. So you can't say that, well, the lesser wives didn't get as much, because all of the sons of Jacob ended up getting inherited. They all got blessings from God. So they were all acknowledged as legitimate children. So Zilpah's, Leah's maid, bare Jacob's sons, and Bilhah does the same under both situations. And so, like I said, there is no dowry that you find being paid for the handmaids, though. The handmaids literally have no payment. They don't get dowry, because if they were already sold to Laban, for instance, into Laban's household as servants, the payment of them has already been made in a different sense, if you know what I mean. So the father, in other words, Laban, whenever he took over them and gave them food, clothing, shelter, or whatever it is he gave them, was paid for them. So there was a form of dowry, but it's not dowry. And the thing that's important about the dowry, as we continue to look at it in Scripture, is that it's literally a token. It's not really about how much a person's worth, so to speak, because nobody's really worth as much as you pay. They're always, a human's worth more than whatever you pay for them. But there is this token value that's put on people that expresses the ability to exchange. It's like, I gave you this for that, and you can remember it. So, for instance, when you make a covenant or a deal through dowry for a wife, and a man gives dowry to the father or the whoever the head of the household is, that substance, silver, which is what's usually used, or in the case of the Proverbs 31 woman, her price is far above rubies. Or in the case of what we saw with Rebecca, she got bracelets of silver and bracelets of gold and jewels and all kind of good stuff. Those things were things to be remembered. So